This is a poem by Theodore Roethke, and it's called My Papa's Waltz. The whiskey on your breath could make a small boy dizzy, but I hung on like death. Such waltzing was not easy. We romped until the pans slid from the kitchen shelf. My mother's countenance could not unfrown itself. The hand that held my wrist was battered on one knuckle. At every step you missed, my right ear scraped a buckle. You beat time on my head with a palm caked hard by dirt, then waltzed me off to bed, still clinging to your shirt. Now, this poem is often very intriguing to people. It's one of those poems that you can understand the story, let's say, the surface level of it very, very quickly. It's a father that it sounds like has come home after maybe a long day, but definitely a day of work, probably, but maybe also drinking after work. References to dirt, knuckles that are battered, and his breath, of course, has whiskey on it. So the boy, maybe it's time for him to be in bed. Maybe he stayed up because his dad hasn't come home yet. But when the father does come home, the father, it sounds like, is goofing around, grabbing the boy, dancing kind of wildly in the kitchen, and where the mom, I always imagine her with her arms crossed, looking on, not really happy. And then finally, the father takes him into bed. That's the innocent way of reading the poem. I had memories something like that myself, where, my dad would be goofing around, and I see my mom would maybe get mad at him and say, now they're not going to be able to go to sleep or something, right? And I have positive memories of situations like this. But this poem lends itself to a very strong alternative reading, if alternative is the right word. The fact that he's got whiskey on his breath, and it's enough to make a small boy dizzy, suggests maybe he's drank a lot this evening, right? And maybe it's a frequent thing, right? He has to hold on tightly enough that he calls it hold on like death. And he said such waltzing was not easy. So such waltzing means this kind of waltzing, right? So whether that's what he does with his father, or whether we're supposed to realize that's a hint that maybe it's not really waltzing, right? So waltzing is a word that I think is rooted in the German, and Waltz means to walk, I think. And so it's a dance. You're not really walking when you do the dance, right? But it's a dance that's normally considered a relatively sedate dance. It has a fluidity to it, but it also has reverses of direction. You can find the beat of a waltz basically in this poem. The whiskey on your breath could make a small boy dizzy. And you could sort of dance the poem, basically, right? But this doesn't sound like that kind of beautiful waltzing. It's not the very elegant and fluid dancing of the debutantes in the Austrian, in the Vienna Capitol dance that we've seen videos of. This is something different. Now, the words start to add up a while too, right? So I hung on like death. The word death is strong. And then we romped. Now, romped usually has something positive or even happy or something. When somebody's romping, it's not the same as trudging, right? But we're going to get slid from the kitchen shelf. These are the pans, so they're knocked out of what they're supposed to be. And then you have the mother frowning. That can't be ignored. The next stanza has the hand that held my wrist was battered. So we have battered, we have knuckle. Now, many physical jobs that men do, they can get their knuckles battered while they're doing those jobs. However, it quickly makes us think about whether fighting is really why the knuckle is actually battered. And we don't have any more information on that. And right after that it says, at every step you missed. So the missing itself is a reminder of the drunkenness of the dancing. My right ear scraped a buckle. Now, it gives us maybe the size of the boy, that he's, only half as tall as his father, but also the scraping of the buckle is going to make most of us think in terms of being hit by a belt. That's where the buckle, is from. You beat time on my head. For my students over the years, this is the line they often bring up first when they start to realize maybe there's an alternative thing happening here, right? So I can imagine it innocent, as the boy is so low down to his father that his father is keeping a rhythm on the boy's head to tease the boy. I remember I was in a dance class once, and there was a young woman who really couldn't seem to find any rhythm, and I think we were doing cha-cha, but whatever it was, I realized, wow, she's having trouble. So I started basically sort of squeezing a little bit on the pulse of the music so she could get the pulse. So I can imagine this is not a negative thing, that he's actually helping the boy keep the time. But then once in a while, we get those words again, right? It says, with a palm caked hard by dirt. That's a working man's hand. Yeah. But the palm is also part of your hand you might strike somebody with. It says, then waltz me off to bed, still clinging to your shirt. The clinging is, the man may be still unsteady on his feet and the boy's worried about being dropped, but I think it suggests something that might be hinted at from the beginning of the poem, and that's that this boy may be staying up and looking forward, and however else we might read this poem, he loves his father and clings to his father. Now, the alternative reading, of course, that I'm hinting at is the idea that maybe waltzing is only an allegorical thing, and that what's really happening is the boy is being beat. The father has come home, he's drunk, he's hitting his boy for reasons we don't for sure know, but this may be something that is relatively ritualistic, in the sense that this might be frequent enough that in the boy's mind it is something like a dance, right? But it's a dark dance when we interpret the poem this way. Now, sometimes when I have a class together, I kind of try to lead them a little bit, to try to get some of them talking about the innocent way to look at this, and then some of them noticing those harsh words that add up to something that might be much more violent. But I myself am doing that to some degree just to play, because I think the poem obviously holds both, in the sense that you can put together a logical, rational argument that the poem is about a boy and his father coming home and drunkenly dancing with him in a kind of a happy moment where the mom would rather the kid just go off to bed, right? And at the same time, that could simply be an allegorical cover for what's really happening, and that's the abuse of this boy, which maybe something has happened over and over again, right? I don't think you have to pick one of those and say the poem only has one of those. I think it's an amazing poem that has a tension, that those two things fit together so unhappily that we have a tension between what could be like a wonderful positive and what actually is. Now, I've read before critics who say that that what maybe is going on here, or what is going on here, is that the boy who grew up to be Theodore Roethke was a very sensitive young boy, obviously, because he becomes a poet eventually. But his father wasn't. His father was this working man who was crude and boisterous and rough, and maybe didn't even know how rough and difficult it was for the boy to sort of survive in that relationship in a number of different ways. Well, there might be some truth to that. If I someday read an interview and Roethke actually said that, I might believe it strongly, right? But I kind of think sometimes there's a stereotyping going on. And the stereotyping is that men who become poets are sensitive and blue-collar men in general aren't. And I think those are absolute nonsense, stereotypes that make no sense at all. It's partially because I grew up with men who were physical working men. I had uncles who were not grave diggers, well diggers. I had an uncle who dug septic for 40, 50 years. My dad was a sheet metal man. My grandfather was a sheet metal man. And then you meet all kinds of other working men when, you grow up with some. And over time, you realize there's an incredible range. Sometimes a very soft and sensitive man might be a very physical working man. It's just his sensitivity doesn't necessarily come out in words. He doesn't turn into a poet. My father, I always remember, won dance contests before I was old enough to know. And I only later heard about how good a dancer my dad was, and I never got to see it. And that kind of bummed me out and stuff, right? But, so I don't find this idea of roughness and sensitivity, to be obviously and necessarily at odds with each other. The boy may be talking about that was the range of things inside his house. There was the physical and the sometimes very difficult, and then there was also a kind of boisterous affection that came out with it too. So I hope you like this poem. It's one of those great poems that lets us very quickly go to the question of, is there another meaning to this poem than the one we see when we first read it?